Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, and our Recall Triad for Corinthians 8:7 through 9:6 on Paul's doctrine of Exousia, which is the authoritative liberty in Christ that we receive when we become believers, and how we are to responsibly exercise our liberty in Christ. Let's begin with block 1. Take a look at Exousia Gnosis. Every believer has their own level of knowledge of conviction. The food laws no longer held any relevance for Paul. However, Paul taught that ethical liberty is not to be the cause of someone stumbling in any spiritual way. Additionally, Paul, in his apologetics for his apostolic authority, said that his apostolic authority was based totally on the exousia of Christ himself, the authoritative liberty of Christ himself. Now in block 2 we'll take a look at the exousia dunamis, potential power. A mature believer, through misused liberty, can actually cause a fellow Christian to have a defiled conscience. The cross of Christ stands for the weaker Christian as well. Therefore, do not misuse your liberty, says Paul. It is a sin against Christ himself if you injure one of the weaker brethren in any spiritual way. And spiritual companionship, spiritual fellowship demands that we do not misuse our exousia liberty in Christ. Critically important for Paul. Don't misuse the liberty you've been given. Now in block 3 we take a look at the actualization of our liberty, the energia. Paul says, do not scandalize a weaker brother in the faith. Paul claims apostolic authority for this teaching. He says this teaching has been sealed in his Damascus Road encounter with the resurrected Christ. Paul claimed to actually possess liberty in Christ because his life was in Christ. Because he was crucified with Christ, he had liberty in Christ. That's a very contradictory sounding statement, but for Paul and for believers, we truly do understand this through spiritual perception. But by taking up the cross of Christ, Paul said he had liberty in Christ. The liberty over the dominion of sin, liberty over the secular rule of the world. From here we want to take a look at our 4-point focus to kind of encapsulate the lesson. And if we look at the 4-point focus, number 1 for Paul, responsible Christian ethic will involve maturely using one's exousia, authoritative liberty in Christ, in the following ways. Concerning gnosis, responsibility begins with saving knowledge, a conviction of the heart, which is acquired by putting on the mind of Christ, which we covered in an earlier lesson. Second, ethical liberty is always tempered liberty by the fellowship of the church, which is the new temple in Christ, again from a previous lesson in Corinthians. And third, on the Damascus Road, Paul discovered a loving and forgiving resurrected Christ. He discovered an advocate in Christ and the concept of attentive lordship, again a term we discovered earlier in a lesson in Corinthians. This advocate, the parakletos advocate that we have in Christ with our ethics. So we put on the mind of Christ. We are sensitive toward the new temple in Christ, which is the ecclesia, called out ones, the church. And we do have an advocate at the right hand of the Father who intercedes for us continually. That's why we live a life in prayer and a life in meditation, because in our meditation, Christ is in communion with us, and we are in communion with Christ at the right hand of the Father as Parakletos advocate. He said, I will send you the Spirit of truth. That's why we begin with gnosis. We begin with the Spirit of truth. But from the Spirit of truth, we move into the corporate understanding of corporate responsibility, sensitivity toward those who are weaker in conviction than we are, sensitive to the other members in the church, be giving, be the disciple who takes up agape self-giving. Third, we actualize that liberty in Christ by living a life in Christ and by taking up the cross of Christ. So it involves the gnosis, knowledge of conviction, the dunamis, potentiality of liberty, which is sensitive to the church, and the energia, actualization of liberty by living within the lordship and understanding Christ as advocate. So our recall triad would basically be gnosis, dunamis, potentiality, energia, actuality. You notice how all of this lesson becomes immersed in the realm of spirit, because dunamis is potentiality of spirit, energia is actuality of spirit. So basically our liberty is a liberty we live now in the realm of spirit, moving from potentiality to actuality. We do that how? Tempered by agape love, tempered by agape self-giving. We move from dunamis, potentiality, to energia, actuality in the realm of spirit, tempering our liberty in Christ with the love of Christ. Tempering our liberty in Christ with the love of Christ. And of course, later in Corinthians, we're going to find this when we get to Corinthians 13. But Paul's preparing us. He's already speaking of agape self-giving. He tempers liberty with love. He tempers liberty with love. That's how we live in Christ. That's how we take up our cross. So we get a tremendous recall triad here that is basically a triad of gnosis, which is really almost could be better conceptualized as Sophia, because Sophia is wisdom of the heart, and technically we're talking about conviction, so it really is maybe not gnosis, but maybe more so Sophia, conviction of the heart. And then we move into that flow from the dunamis, potentiality of spirit, to the energia, actuality of spirit, all which tempers our liberty in Christ, our exousia. Exousia, out of the essence of divinity. We receive a gift out of the essence of divinity, out of Christ the Messiah. That gift is justification first, but then it's ongoing lordship and sanctification. And in sanctification, we live within the liberty of Christ. We live in the sanctification of liberty, but also the sanctification of responsibility, and especially, says Paul, the sanctification of agape, self-giving love. And we do practice that in our church at 121. We do practice that in our life groups. We practice that in our fellowship. And it really does begin with the spirit of truth that lives in our heart, the spirit of truth that lives in our mind, and the imprint of the cross of Christ that is in the core of our center of our life, so that we can live in the realm of spirit within the liberty of Jesus Christ. We'll pick up next time on lesson, chapter 9, verse 7.